Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and you've found your way to Kinda Murdery, a place that means more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories, the unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. For heaven's sake, he wrote, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself. Hey everybody, I'm your host Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. Thank you for deciding to be here. Today we're going to discuss William George Herein, Chicago's infamous lipstick killer. But first, a couple quick reminders. I'm a disabled person with cerebral palsy, and I want Kinda Murdery to be an emotional support community for people with disabilities. If you or someone you know is living with a disability and you'd like somebody to share your experiences with, please reach out to the show, kindamurdery@gmail.com or @kindamurdery on social media. I've been thinking about doing a Disabilities Stories episode where I share some experiences from my own life and also some listener stories. So, if you have a story that you'd like to share, especially if you feel like your perspective or the perspectives you've encountered are thoughts and feelings that aren't shared enough, please reach out to the show, kindamurdery@gmail.com. If I can get some listener stories to add to my own, I'd love to record the Disability Stories episode and share with others what my, and more importantly, your life experiences have been. Also, if you're a true crime stan and you have favorite murders, apologies to my favorite murder for the implied brand riff here, but if there's a story you'd like to hear me cover, let me know and I'll do it. kindamurdery@gmail.com. And hey, Girl Plus Ocean, if you're listening, I know I owe you multiple emails at this point. Apologies, I'm behind on all kinds of things, but I haven't forgotten about you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for reaching out. Okay, and with that, it's murder time. Today I'm going to be telling you about a famous Chicago serial killer. His name was William George Hereins, notoriously remembered as the Lipstick Killer, and he terrorized Chicago for a relatively brief period in the 1940s. In the 40s, the press presented Hereins to the public as a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde killer, a man who wanted to listen to his better angels, but who was utterly at the mercy of his psychotic and depraved sexual and homicidal urges. Before I go any deeper, I'd like to give a shout out to the excellent article on Hereins from www.allthat'sinteresting.com, written by Katie Serena. I'll link to it in the show notes. And also, another shout out to newspapers.com. Their massive archive of primary resource newspaper articles is a continually indispensable resource for me. Today, I give special credit to an article written by Victor Cohn for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune Company and printed in the Des Moines Register in 1948. So back to William George Hereins. Unlike some killers, his story didn't end when he was convicted on 3 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 1946. No, indeed. William and his story survived and evolved for decades until the lipstick killer finally died from diabetic complications at the age of 83 in 2012. Hereins continually and vocally maintained his innocence for all of the 66 years he was incarcerated. As some of you may know, I often build my narratives almost entirely from contemporaneous newspaper reports. I do it this way because I enjoy the research, and also because it allows me to tell stories in a manner that can't be easily replicated with a quick Googling. However, in this case, the contemporaneous understandings of Hereins and his crimes don't do the full story justice. So today, I'm going to tell this story a little bit differently than I usually do. First, I'm going to share with you an account of Hereins' crimes and psychosis from the Des Moines Register in January 1948, less than 2 years after his conviction. And then we'll discuss how the story of Hereins' murder and the understanding of the man and his psychology had changed and evolved some 60 years later in 2018, when Katie Serena wrote the www.allthat'sinteresting.com article that I referenced a moment ago. But we begin in 1948. And because of that, I'd like to remind everyone of the historical context of this story that was told 74 years ago. I'm going to stick to the language descriptions and conclusions that were drawn about Hereins and his case in 1948. Some of them would certainly not be the language descriptions or conclusions that we would draw today. But that's why, after we cover Hereins' case in the 40s, we're going to revisit it in 2018. But for now, remember that we're looking at Hereins' story through the eyes of science writer Victor Cohn in 1948. And with that, let's get down to business. Kinda murdery business. The story of William George Hereins was brought to light by 3 medical experts in a series of long interviews conducted in the quiet chapel of the Cook County Jail. The experts appointed by the court were Dr. Harry R. Hoffman, Illinois state psychiatrist, Dr. Foster Kennedy, chief neurologist at New York City's Bellevue Hospital, and Dr. William H. Haynes, director of the Cook County Criminal Court Behavior Clinic. The story they unearthed began with abnormal sexual behavior when Hereins was only 9 years old. It continued with a series of bizarre episodes, outstanding even in this unenlightened age for the way parents, school, church, and authorities ignored the danger signals. William Hereins was a solitary child, sensitive but difficult to know, reported the doctors. Apparently, no one had ever had a close or confidential relationship with him. Certainly, his parents did not. At 9, this pitiful boy began stealing women's underclothing from clotheslines, cellars, and unlocked houses. He would put the undergarments on and experience satisfaction. Editorializing here for a moment, this is a perfect example of what I was talking about when I cautioned everyone to remember that this is written from a 1948 mentality, which is to say that today we know that cross-dressing is not a reliable indicator of homicidal psychosis. In 1948, it was almost conventional wisdom that it was. So again, please don't think that these are my conclusions. All right, let's continue with the story. Hereins' petty larceny may have began at 9 years old with the thieving of women's undergarments, but by 11 or 12 he began to steal other things instead, not because he wanted them, but because it seemed sort of foolish to break in and not take anything. Now, he experienced his physical excitement merely at the act of crawling through an open window. This behavior should have provided grave warning. Psychiatry knows such behavior well and calls it fetishism, sexual gratification by the sight or touch of some substitute object, for example, another person's hair or foot or some piece of wearing apparel, or even by some substitute act. Fetishism is no childish quirk, but a clear warning that treatment is needed. Young William gave society warnings aplenty. For one thing, he confessed his fetishism to a priest. For another, when only 9 and still concentrating on women's clothing, he appeared before a children's court. At 13, on the day he was to have graduated from grammar school, police caught him breaking into a storeroom. He spent a year at a private school for delinquent boys, but 2 months after his release was again arrested for burglary. His parents begged and the court granted probation so William might attend a private prep school. He was an honor student and faithful in fulfilling his religious duties. At 16, after placement tests, the University of Chicago accepted him as a sophomore, dispensing with the 4th year of high school and the 1st year of college. The University of Chicago is an incredibly rigorous and excellent institution. If they took him at 16 and allowed him to skip his freshman year, William Hereins was almost certainly a genius. All right, back to it. Although he was accepted to a prestigious university, William's deep maladjustment continued. Now the youth, 190 pounds, 6 feet tall, and strong as an ox, roamed the Chicago lakefront at night, breaking into perhaps 300 homes and apartments within less than 10 months, with the same perverted purpose as his childhood thefts. A tragic struggle raged within his mind. In 1942, after twice seeing the movie Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, he had invented an imaginary George. It was George, not William, who was evil. As William studied in his Chicago dormitory room, George would tempt him. Usually when I had to get out, Hereins said, I would ask him, George, where he was going. He would talk back and forth. I would argue in every way possible with him, but he always wanted to get out. When I tried to resist him, I would get a headache, Hereins confessed. It seemed like my head was a balloon filled with water. Trying painfully hard, Hereins 3 or 4 times locked his clothes in a closet, but the urge drove him out clad only in bathrobe and slippers, forced him through his window into sub-zero weather along an icy 6th-floor gutter and down a fire escape to go on more weird burglary sprees. Often, he merely entered a home and then, fully satisfied, departed without stealing anything. When he did steal, he remained uncaught because he never tried to sell the loot. He intended no murders. He committed 3. Each time, he testified, it was the noise that set me off. In June 1945, he entered the apartment of Mrs. Josephine Ross, a divorcee. She awakened screaming, and he stabbed her to death. In December 1945, he entered the apartment of Frances Brown. A dog barked, and Miss Brown, a stenographer honorably discharged from the Waves 3 months earlier, ran out of the bathroom in her nightgown. She screamed, and he shot her, then stabbed her until she was dead. The Waves, in case you were wondering, was a division of the Navy created by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1942 during World War II, and it stood for Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, WAVES, back now to the moment of Miss Brown's murder. Herein dragged Miss Brown's body back into the bathroom, found her lipstick, and scrawled an agonized message on the mirror. It was the message that would make him famous as the lipstick killer. For heaven's sake, he wrote, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself. 28 days later, he strangled the blonde, blue-eyed 6-year-old girl, Suzanne Degnan. Again, he had been surprised as his victim awoke while he was prowling. Little Suzanne's dismembered body was found in the city sewer system. William told the doctors that he remembered murdering Suzanne, but could not recall mutilating her body. Trying to remember, Hereins said, was like gazing at a floor with holes in it. I've tried to look through the holes to see what's down there, he explained. There just aren't enough holes to find out. After the Degnan affair, he went to an all-night restaurant and had coffee and donuts, then at 6 a.m. returned to his dormitory to study. 5 months later, he was caught by police during another burglary. The doctors found Hereins physically normal in almost every respect. But when they inserted a sharp needle into his fingertip, almost to the base of the fingernail, the boy felt no pain. God, it's a good thing he felt no pain. That sounds like torture. And that's something we'll touch on when we get to the 2018 version of this story. But continuing, the boy felt no pain, nor did he feel sharp pinpricks at many sensitive parts of the body. It sounds like they're sticking needles into his testicles now. Jeez. Modern medicine in 1948, ladies and gentlemen. Hereins's inability to feel pain was hysteria, the doctors said. Imaginary reality. Now the specialists are speaking. This striking reduction of power to appreciate painful stimulation as such, together with its remarkable deepening as a result of suggestion, is to us clear proof of the patient's hysterical personality. And the invention of the evil George revealed a power for hysterical fantasy to be expected in a hysterical individual passing through long-sustained emotional conflict. Putting the blame on George enabled William to live with untroubled conscience and continue prowling. The boy had an immense egocentricity despite his failure to rule himself. He pasted pictures of Hitler, Göring, and Goebbels in his scrapbooks, and he wrote, I wonder why I can't run the world. Wouldn't it be great to have that much power? Men sacrifice their lives for it. There must be an easier and a faster way to gain control. But the experts were certain that William Hereins was aware of his terrible acts. William, they concluded, suffered from no psychosis, the most extreme form of mental disease. He could understand the proceedings against him, conduct his defense in a rational and reasonable manner, and always had been aware of the nature and purpose of his acts. However, the report concluded, he has a deep sexual perversion and is as emotionally insensitive within as he is incapable of feeling pain without. He is unstable and hysterically unpredictable. Why? There is no easy answer, but inadequate sex education must bear much of the blame, Dr. Kennedy has said. If Hereins had received a proper sex education, he probably would have been normal. Wow. That's one heck of a controversial opinion, I'd say, in 1948. People are still fighting sex education today. When William was 10 or 11, he saw some sex antics among small boys. Upset, he told his mother, who Dr. Kennedy described to the New York Academy of Medicine as a prim, buttoned-up woman, a good housekeeper, chic and smart, and a strict Catholic. She told William only this: all sex is dirty. If you touch anyone, you get a disease. Other than that, no sex instruction was given by William's parents. Hereins' examiners became convinced the boy actually regarded normal sexual experience as far more repugnant than murder. So here we go, they're borrowing from Freud and doing the good old man trick of it's mom's fault, it's the woman's fault. Maybe it was, but that is often a convenient scapegoat when you start asking old men what the problem is. At the university, Hereins had finally begun to have a few dates. On 8 occasions, he said, he tried haltingly to embrace girls. Each time, he immediately burst into tears and was upset and unable to sleep. No such remorse followed any of his burglaries or killings. Legally, Hereins was declared sane. He pleaded guilty to the 3 murders and was sentenced to life imprisonment and sent to Joliet Penitentiary. Prison psychiatrists soon judged him unbalanced, and he was transferred to the psychiatric division of Illinois State Prison at Menard. Nobody had stopped him. Dr. Haynes told Victor Cohn that Hereins was, in fact, mentally ill. Why didn't society find that out sooner, for example, when he was 9 years old and breaking into homes to steal women's clothing? Dr. Arbenet contends, had the boy then been turned over to a qualified psychiatrist for examination, it is safe to predict that the subsequent murders would not have been committed. Why did William Hereins kill? Instead, why not ask, who tried to stop him? Who are the guilty? William Hereins and other children who display signs of mental illness? Or their parents, their clergymen, their children's court judges, their teachers, and you and I? And that is William Hereins' story as told in 1948. Let's take a look now at how the story is retold in 2018. We'll tackle Katie Serena's article from allthat'sinteresting.com right after these brief messages. Welcome back, everyone, to Kinda Murdery. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and we continue with today's mystery. Who was the real William Hereins, Chicago's confessed, convicted, and infamous lipstick killer? Was he the William Hereins described in 1948? Was he the Hereins described in 2018, which we will tackle now? Or was he a combination of both? You will be the judge of that. William Hereins was 17 when he was convicted for beheading a 6-year-old girl. But did he do it? He was without a doubt a skilled burglar, but was he really responsible for the 3 murders for which he was sentenced to life? William George Hereins' early life gave no indication he would grow up to become a murderer, much less the gruesome lipstick killer. Okay, editorializing. As I'm sure you recall, since you just listened to it, the central thesis of the article written about him in 1948 was that his early life gave every sign that he would grow up to be a serial killer, and essentially the very first sentence of the 2018 article, with 2018 evolved mores, is there was no sign whatsoever. So that's immediately pretty interesting. Although he had a record of petty theft since he was a child, Katie Serena writes, Hereins had no record of violence. Born in Chicago, Illinois, on the eve of the Great Depression in 1928, William Hereins had grown up in a poverty-stricken home with parents who argued more than they didn't. As an escape, young William Hereins took to wandering the streets in search of entertainment, which often came in the form of petty theft. While working at a grocery store at the age of 12, Hereins accidentally shortchanged himself with a customer. To make up for it, he stole a single-dollar bill from an apartment by reaching through the crack in a chained door. From there, he graduated to stealing larger sums and later personal items. This version, of course, runs in direct opposition to the article written in 1948, which stated that Hereins first broke into a home to steal women's clothing at the age of 9. Eventually, Hereins had himself a small collection of pilfered items that ranged from the expensive to the mundane, like cameras, cocktail shakers, guns, and even handkerchiefs. At 13, he was arrested breaking into a local building's basement, the first in a long string of arrests that would garner him a reputation with the Chicago police as a nuisance, though not yet as anything more. He described his theft as a hobby, something that kept him busy while his parents were fighting. He was eventually sent to a boys' semi-correctional school in Indiana. However, his time there proved ineffective as he was arrested again afterwards. This time, the court recommended he be sent to a private institution in central Illinois. While ineffective at curbing his crime streak, the schools were good for one thing. At both institutions, Hereins proved to be an impeccable student and earned top grades in all subjects. So good were his grades, in fact, that before he even turned 16, he qualified for courses at the University of Chicago as part of a gifted students program. In 1945, by the time he was 17, he had enrolled in courses and was hoping to become an electrical engineer. However, not even advanced courses, involvement in extracurricular activities, rising popularity, or a string of girlfriends could supposedly stop William Hereins from reverting to his childhood hobby and eventually evolving into something far more sinister. Though the murder of Frances Brown was the most popularized because of the lipstick message and the gruesome crime scene, it was actually the second murder supposedly committed by William Hereins. The first came 6 months prior, in June of 1945, and didn't even make the front page of the local papers. 43-year-old Josephine Ross had been found in her home dead from multiple stab wounds to the neck. A skirt had been wrapped around her neck, and her wounds had been taped shut. Police interviewed her fiancé and several ex-boyfriends, all of whom had alibis. It was determined that Ross was killed by an intruder, likely one who was there to burgle her, but who had been surprised to see her before they were able to complete the robbery. As nothing was taken, police assumed that after killing Ross, the suspect had fled. However, that was the end of the assumptions, as nothing further had been found at the scene. There were a few dark hairs found clutched in Ross's hand, though they had only led police far enough to guess that they were looking for a dark-haired suspect. As there had been no suspicious characters reported at the scene, no witnesses, and no noise disturbances reported, it seemed for the time being that the Ross murder would go unsolved. That is until 6 months later when William Hereins committed his second murder, the one that would become the hot topic of Chicago and kick the police investigation into high gear. On December 11, 1945, 32-year-old Frances Brown was discovered savagely murdered. Like the Ross murder, Brown's head was wrapped, this time in towels. Also like the Ross murder, there was a startling lack of evidence. In the apartment, the police had found no fingerprints, no evidence of burglary, and no hint of who the murderer could have been. There was, however, one glaring clue left for police, the strange message scrawled on the living room wall in Brown's own red lipstick. Immediately, the media picked up the case and splashed it across the front page, branding the culprit as the Lipstick Killer. Of course, thus far, the lipstick killer was nameless, an unidentified man, or woman, as the police once insisted, on a silent rampage through the streets of Chicago. For just short of 1 month, the city was held in a sensationalized state of terror, egged on by the Chicago newspapers, which waited with bated breath for the next horrific crime scene to be discovered. Within the first week of 1946, it finally came, when William Hereins, still an unknown and unsuspected, committed his final crime. Hereins' third murder was without a doubt the most brutal. Around 7:30 in the morning on January 7th, James Degnan discovered his 6-year-old daughter Suzanne was missing from her bedroom. Police swarmed the home and immediately began a search of the upscale Chicago neighborhood. In the Degnans' home, a crumpled ransom note was discovered in Suzanne's room which demanded $20,000 from the family. It also listed orders not to involve the police and claimed more orders would follow. As police doubled their search, they discovered the ransom note was nothing more than a ruse. 12 hours after she was reported missing, young Suzanne Degnan was found dead. Around 7 p.m. that evening, Suzanne's severed head was found floating in a sewer near the Degnan home. The ribbons that had been tied in her hair that morning were still in place. Before long, her legs and torso were also discovered in nearby sewer basins. Once again, Chicago was caught up in a horrific but captivating crime, though the police had yet to officially connect it to the murders of the lipstick killer. The public waited to see who would be arrested, but it took almost 6 months before a likely arrest came. As the Chicago police investigated the Degnan kidnapping and murder, along with the Ross and Brown murders, William Hereins enjoyed life as a young playboy at the University of Chicago. As June 26th rolled around, Hereins was on top of his game. He had recently celebrated an uncle's safe return from the war and was taking a ballroom dancing class and had developed an interest in playing chess. He was even in the midst of a budding romance with a classmate, whom he planned to take on a date that night. He just needed some extra cash. For the date. William Hereins originally planned to cash a savings bond for $1,000, which he'd procured through theft at the post office. Unfortunately for him, the post office was closed when he arrived. This was no matter to Hereins. As had become second nature to him, Hereins reached into an open apartment door in the same upscale neighborhood where Suzanne Degnan once lived. But the tenant of the apartment spotted him. As Hereins fled, he was followed by 2 policemen. Cornered, Hereins pulled a gun from the back of his jeans, one he claimed to have packed in case he was mugged while carrying the bond, and turned it on the 2 officers. Discrepancies have been found between William Hereins' account of his arrest and that of the 2 officers. The officers claim that Hereins fired at them, and Hereins claims that the police shot first. Whatever the case, shots were fired and Hereins fled. A chase ensued, which culminated in an almost comical apprehension. An off-duty police officer, still in his swim trunks from a day at the beach, stopped Hereins in his tracks by smashing a stack of flower pots over his head and rendering him unconscious. While his arrest was unpleasant, William Hereins would come to realize that being hit on the head with a flower pot was the most pleasant thing that he would experience for a long while, as the next few days would prove to be some of the worst of William Hereins' life. After having his head stitched up, Hereins was transported to the hospital wing of the Cook County Jail. There he was subjected to torturous interrogation, during which he slipped in and out of consciousness due to pain, drugs, and exhaustion. Again, here, in the first article, they claimed that Hereins was such a hysterical sociopath, essentially, that he could not even feel pain. In this one, he was hardly ever conscious because of the sheer amount of pain he was subjected to. After naming him as the suspected lipstick killer, the police searched Hereins' room at the university, his parents' home, and a locker he kept at a local train station. In the locker, they found evidence of his lifetime hobby of thievery, and after taking his fingerprints, discovered that there was a 9-point match to those found on the Degnan ransom note, a fact that would be later disputed. And of course, the FBI actually requires a 12-point match to make a positive identification. Despite all of this, William Hereins did not confess to any of the 3 murders, much to the police's dismay. In an effort to get him to admit to at least one of them, Police enlisted the help of several nurses and one doctor and reverted to sinister methods. During one interrogation session, a nurse poured ether on Hereins' genitals while he was strapped to a bed. During another, a police officer repeatedly punched him in the stomach while chanting details of the Degnan murder in an effort to spark recognition in Hereins. Several days into his interrogation, a spinal tap was administered in an effort to force Hereins into confessing to being the lipstick killer. After the spinal tap, a polygraph was ordered, but Hereins was in too much pain for an accurate reading to be assessed. One doctor even injected Hereins with sodium pentothal, known to the layman as a truth serum, though it did nothing more than put him in a state of semi-conscious delirium. After 4 torturous days, Hereins eventually began to mutter the beginnings of a confession. While under the influence of the sodium pentothal solution and hovering somewhere between excruciating pain and unconsciousness, Hereins spoke of a man named George who could have potentially committed the murders. Police searched for a George and questioned Hereins' friends and family, but ultimately came up empty-handed. The fact that Hereins' middle name was George ultimately led the police to believe the statement to be somewhat of a confession to Hereins being the lipstick killer, despite the fact that William Hereins' handwriting did not match the note left on Frances Brown's wall. I'm going to pause and editorialize here as well. I've seen this claim multiple places, and I just think it's utterly absurd. I don't know who created the expectation that you could achieve a positive handwriting match through a missive written on a wall or a mirror, depending on where you look, in lipstick, but it's basically preposterous. Most likely writing in lipstick is going to be done in some kind of block letters and with a grip that doesn't even approximate holding a pencil or a pen. It kind of reminds me of a bizarro world, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit, with no one seeming to acknowledge that the gloves didn't fit OJ because he was wearing a latex glove on his hand. Similarly, well, it's not a handwriting match written on a wall in lipstick. Give me a break. If that actually held water, then any criminal should leave a handwritten note in lipstick on the wall of anywhere they commit a crime, because once they are discovered, they can use the lipstick writing to establish that it's not their handwriting and therefore they can't possibly be the culprit. It's a joke. Come on. All right, back to it. Despite the fact that William Hereins' handwriting did not match the note left on Frances Brown's wall, again, and the fact that police only had 9 of the FBI required 12 points of identification necessary to deem fingerprints a 100% match, so does that mean they were considered a 75% match? I don't know. And the fact that Hereins' confession was disputed by several nurses, police ultimately charged William Hereins as the lipstick killer. On July 12, 1946, 17 days after his arrest, Hereins was indicted for assault with intent to kill, robbery, 23 counts of burglary, and 3 counts of murder. Despite the fact that the interrogation was clearly botched, not to mention that all of his places of residence and his locker had been searched without a warrant, Hereins agreed to a full trial, even though he risked being sent to the electric chair. The thing is, once you're dead, there's no clearing things up, he said, looking back at his arrest in a 2008 interview. When you're alive, you still have a chance to prove that you weren't guilty, so I was better off being alive than dead. Ultimately, after the state's attorney offered him a deal of 3 consecutive life sentences, Hereins pled guilty to all 3 murder charges. Later, he would recall that he only did so because he feared for his life and was afraid of what should happen should he turn down the deal. His decision may have saved him from the electric chair, but it ended up costing him the rest of his life. For the next 65 years, William Hereins would be incarcerated and face a maximum security lifestyle. The lipstick killer would attempt suicide 3 times. Hereins would maintain his innocence up until the day he died at the age of 83. When he died, he was Chicago's longest-serving criminal. So I'm not 100% sure what to make of all of this. I would think that it's likely that the 2018 article is far better researched since there's been some 6 odd decades for information to be divulged versus barely a year and a half. I've already told you some of the things that I don't buy, like making much of no handwriting match with lipstick on a wall. I also don't particularly buy how easily this author dismisses the possibility that Hereins could be a violent sociopath. For one thing, we essentially know, since he was admitted as a sophomore to the University of Chicago at the age of 16 or 17, that he was a genius. Genius sometimes accompanies sociopathy. Also, he was such an extreme kleptomaniac, of which there is no dispute, that I think it's a bit of a stretch to suggest that such inveterate criminal behavior from such a young age could not possibly be indicative of violence. Inveterate criminal behavior without consideration for the consequences or harm imposed on someone else, accompanied by genius, certainly suggests possible sociopathy to me. And you know what comes along often with sociopathy is the ability to lie and con people in an extremely convincing manner. It seems as though some of the details of the 1948 article may have been made up or exaggerated in order to fit William Hereins into a classic sort of Freudian and frankly homophobic or transphobic assumptions about what kind of personality and behavior indicates possible proclivity to murder. On the flip side, it feels as though the 2018 author is all in on Hereins being wrongfully incarcerated, and I'm not sure I can buy that either. Also, the 2018 author seems to have decided that all of the quotations from the various medical experts in the 40s were made up out of whole cloth. Because remember, these were doctors describing the fact that he could not feel pain. These were doctors describing his behaviors as etc. But perhaps they'd all just tortured Hereins so badly that they needed to invent a story to justify their actions. I'm not sure we know the answer to that, or that we necessarily ever will. We do know that William Hereins, although incarcerated, had some 65 years to craft and advance his version of the story of his life, a luxury that his victims would never, ever be afforded. And I'm not going to say alleged victims because he confessed and was convicted. In memory of Suzanne Degnan, Josephine Ross, and Frances Brown, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. If you've enjoyed today's Kinda Murdery, please tell your friends and family, tell strangers, leave a review. It's the best way to ensure that I can keep telling that special brand of bizarre and terrible tales that you'll only find here on Kinda Murdery.